Kubernetes, one of the most revolutionary technologies to come about in the enterprise data center in the last several years. Well, what if you also want to use Kubernetes not just in the enterprise data center, but in your home lab to run critical home lab services, or just to play around and learn the technology better? Well, stick around in this video. I want to show you an easy way to get up and running quickly in just a few minutes with a Kubernetes cluster in your home lab. Kubernetes is historically a complex and challenging technology solution to configure, to install, to manage using manual processes. However, I want to introduce you in this video to a solution that is open source. It's free to download and it's awesome. The solution is called Rancher. And using Rancher, this open source utility, we can not only install Kubernetes clusters, we can do that in an automated way. And Rancher makes use of existing infrastructure. If you're like me, you run a hypervisor in your home lab environment. For me, that's VMware vSphere. Rancher provides an easy way to provision a Kubernetes cluster in a VMware vSphere environment using only a simple Linux template. In this video, I'm going to show you how we can easily, in just a few minutes, spin up a functional Kubernetes cluster in VMware vSphere in a totally automated way using Rancher. In order to get started, we want to spin up a Rancher instance. So what I have is I have a simple Ubuntu 2004 virtual machine, as you can see in the terminal. It's a 2004 LTS release. And what we're going to do is we're going to install Docker, and then we're going to install Rancher by means of pulling down a Docker container. Now, Rancher has a specific Docker release that is compatible, and you can find that on their documentation site. And I'm going to have the link to that specific documentation in the description for the video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste in the command to install Docker, the release that is the latest release that is compatible with Rancher. So as you can see, we're pasting in the command. It's going to pull down the Docker install script, and it's going to run that script on our Ubuntu 2004 virtual machine. And there we have it. We've got the install of Docker installed on our Ubuntu 2004 virtual machine. So what I'm going to do now is, I'm not logged in as root, so what I'm going to do is add my locally logged in user to the Docker group, and that is so I can run Docker commands not being root. So paste in the command. So now my user should be configured correctly to run Docker. Now that we are installed with Docker, one thing I'm going to do first is just check. So I'm running a docker-v, and that shows we are indeed running Docker 20.10.7, which is the latest supported release. So just clear my screen here. So now what we can do is actually pull down the Rancher Docker container image to our local Ubuntu 2004 virtual machine that we have installed Docker on. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to paste in the command, and this is straight from the documentation side on the Rancher documentation page. Again, I will have the link to this specific page in the description for the video. So I'm going to run the command, and what you'll see happen is the Docker run command will see that we don't have the image locally, and it will proceed to pull the Docker image down. And then once it pulls it down, it will provision the container, and we should see the container spin up. Okay, so now the pull of the Docker container for Rancher has completed successfully. So what we can do is we can now run a Docker PS, and what we see is we indeed have a Rancher Docker container up and running. We see we've got our ports forwarded through. for 80 and 443. So now we have our website pulled up, or our IP address that's housing the Rancher Docker container, our Ubuntu host. And as we see, we are getting an SSL error, which in this case is good because that means our Docker container is responding to us. So I'm going to just simply continue on to the website. And now we have Rancher up and running. So one of the first things that you have to do with Rancher is Rancher instantiates with a one-time password, temporary password that is provisioned with the container. So they give you a command that you must run from the command line to get the initial password. Once we enter the initial password, then we'll be asked to set an initial password or our permanent password for accessing Rancher from this point forward. So what I'm going to do is go back to the command line, but first I'm going to copy the command that's listed. And actually first we have to get the container ID. So what I'm going to do is go back to Docker PS, and I'm going to copy the container ID. We're going to paste this into the command they give. And now that looks better. So we have a bootstrap password. So now I can copy the bootstrap password, go back to our Rancher UI, the web UI that's initiated. I'm going to paste the password in. I'm going to log in with local user. And now we have the initial dashboard where we can actually set a password for the administrator user. So they recommend just a randomly generated password, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a specific password to use. I'm going to set my password for the lab environment, and I'm going to uncheck statistics and agree to the EULA. So now we've set our password, we're logging in to the initial Rancher dashboard, and here we are. We've got Rancher up and running. So now we want to create our Kubernetes cluster. So from the initial Rancher dashboard, we're going to go down to Create. We're going to click the Create button. And once we click the Create button, it takes us to the Cluster Create dashboard for Rancher. So I'm going to click VMware vSphere. And this brings us to the Add Cluster vSphere dashboard. So the first thing that I'm going to do is under the cluster name, this is the friendly name that Rancher will use to reference this cluster that is created and managed by Rancher. Now I'm going to move down to the name prefix field. What this field does is it actually tells Rancher the virtual machines that it's going to create in vSphere. What do I want to name those? So I'm going to say K8's node, and I'm going to give it a dash just to separate the K8's node and the number that it will be assigned. Then in the count, we tell Rancher how many nodes do I want in the Kubernetes cluster. And for these nodes, by clicking these checkboxes that you see here, we can define which roles the Kubernetes nodes have installed. Now, another important part of the configuration for VMware vSphere is clicking this Add Node Template button. So the Add Node Template button allows Rancher to connect to vSphere. We know that our credentials are good because we've assigned those credentials here. Our Rancher installation is already pulling the configuration from vSphere. We see we've got the data center name, we've got resource pools coming in, we've got data storage. So we're going to set those options. Note how you can size the VM. So we can say 2 CPUs, 2 gigs of memory, 20 gigs of disk space. We can configure networking. And then one other important piece of this configuration for the node template is the template. Now, template refers to VMware vSphere templates that we have available in our vSphere inventory. What I am using is an Ubuntu 2004 cloud image. And you can go out and pull the latest one, which is an OVA appliance, deploy that, and then convert it to a template, which is what I've done. And now I should be ready to create the node. So I'm going to click create. Okay, so now we've created the node template. So we've set the node template. Just a couple of other things to take note of. Under the Kubernetes options, you can actually set the version of Kubernetes. You can also pick your network provider. For this cluster, I'm picking Calico. You can configure private registry, advanced options, authorized endpoint, and this will save the deployment of this Kubernetes cluster. So as you can see right now, we've got waiting for etcd, control plane, and worker nodes to be registered. One thing I like is you can click into the cluster and you can get more detailed information. One thing I want to show you guys that's really cool to see, after we initialize the creation of the Kubernetes cluster in VMware vSphere, we can flip over to the vSphere client, and what we will see is our 3 virtual machines cloning from that Ubuntu cloud image. So guys, I wanted to show the last leg of the journey for creating this Kubernetes cluster is taking place. We're waiting to register with Kubernetes. And as you can see, we're just over 4.3 minutes. So not even 4.5 minutes as of yet. And now we're just simply waiting for the cluster to be registered correctly with all 3 nodes. The timer went to 7 minutes on the cluster creation, and we have a functioning Kubernetes cluster in VMware vSphere. Totally hands-off. No nitty-gritty details or complexities that we had to deal with to get the Kubernetes cluster up and running. Really cool how Rancher takes care of all those details. And as you can see, we can easily scale the pool up, or we can scale the pool down. If we need to add nodes, if we need to take nodes out, Rancher will do all of that for you. So super cool in the home lab. If you're looking to build a Kubernetes cluster to actually run home lab services, or if you're just looking to quickly provision a Kubernetes cluster for learning, for doing labs, for testing out various applications, or learning the networking for Kubernetes, this is a great way to do that. So one of the other things I wanted to show you guys is with the Kubernetes cluster, Rancher makes it also easy to connect to that cluster. So you can do that in the box if you want. And you'll see what I mean. If we click the ellipse to the right-hand side of our cluster, we'll notice that we have a kubectl shell. So I can launch the kubectl, kubectl, whatever you want to call it. I can launch that kubectl shell, and we can start issuing commands right from Rancher for our new Kubernetes cluster. And I'll show you what I mean. Kubectl get nodes. We can see our 3 worker nodes. Now, how would you connect to your Rancher cluster, your Kubernetes cluster, outside of Rancher? Well, they make that easy. If you look at the ellipse, we also see the download Kubeconfig. So simply all you have to do is install kubectl locally, then replace the contents of your config file in your user profile with the contents that you find with this kubeconfig. Well, I hope you've really enjoyed this walkthrough with Rancher and Kubernetes, especially in a VMware vSphere environment. Rancher makes the process to provision Kubernetes extremely easy. It takes all the complexities out. But once you get to the point of actually needing a solution that is managed to run your home lab services, to get into the higher levels of learning with Kubernetes, talking about applications, ingress, development with Kubernetes, you want a solution that you can stand up, that can be automated, and that can manage your Kubernetes clusters easily and automatically. Rancher is a great solution to do that. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know by clicking like and subscribing to the channel if you like this content. Let me know if you're running Kubernetes in your home lab. What are you using to manage it? Are you doing everything manually? I'd be curious to know what you guys are using. I'm Brandon Lee with Virtualization How To. I'll see you guys soon.